My name is Daniel Whitmore. I am 30 years old, and for most of my life, I was an invisible son. My father, Arthur Whitmore, is a man who measures human value in skyscrapers and bank balances. He built a real estate empire from nothing, and he expected his children to be steel reflections of his own ambition. My brother, Julian, was that reflection. He was loud, aggressive, and went to right business schools. I was different. I liked quiet rooms, old books, and the way numbers move in patterns that no one else seemed to notice. To my father, that wasn't talent. It was a defect. He called me the dreamer, with a sneer that felt like a slap. I remember sitting at the dinner table while he discussed multi-million-dollar acquisitions with Julian, never once looking my way. It wasn't just that he ignored me. It was that he looked through me. I was a ghost in a house made of marble and gold. I spent my 20s working a low-level desk job at a logistics firm, far away from the family spotlight. I wanted to build something of my own, but in my father's eyes, if it didn't have the Whitmore name on the front of the building, it simply didn't exist. The night that changed everything was my father's 65th birthday gala. It was held at the Grand Pierre Hotel, a place where the chandeliers cost more than my annual salary. The room was packed with the city's elite, senators, CEOs, and socialites who smelled of expensive perfume and old money. I stood in the corner, holding a glass of water, feeling like an intruder. Julian was at the center of the room, laughing and shaking hands. Then, my father stepped onto the stage for his keynote speech. He talked about legacy and the future of Whitmore Enterprises. A man's greatest achievement is the strength of his bloodline, he said into the microphone. I felt a small spark of hope, thinking maybe, just this once, he would mention me. But then he looked directly at me and chuckled. Of course, every garden has a weed. My son Daniel here has spent a decade filing papers for a trucking company while his brother runs the world. The room erupted in polite, cruel laughter. My face burned. He didn't stop there. He leaned in and said, Daniel is worthless in a boardroom. He's a disappointment to the name. I set my glass down and walked out. The cold night air hit my face, and for the first time in my life, I didn't feel sad. I felt a cold, hard clarity. I didn't go back to my apartment that night. I went to the small, cramped office I had been renting in secret for 2 years. For 24 months, I had been pouring every cent of my meager salary and every hour of my sleep into a software platform. It was a forensic logistics AI designed to track supply chain fraud in real time. I called it the Ghost Map. I knew that large corporations were losing billions to small, untraceable leaks in their shipping routes. My father thought I was just filing papers, but I was actually studying the very veins of global commerce. I had seen the patterns he was too arrogant to notice. That night, as the echoes of his laughter rang in my ears, I logged into the server. I looked at the data I had quietly gathered on Whitmore Enterprises' own logistics wing. I had found something massive, a leak that was draining millions from my father's company every month. It was coming from the inside. I could have gone to him and warned him, but why would I? He had told the world I was worthless. He had told the world I couldn't handle a boardroom. I decided right then that if he wanted to see what I was worth, I would show him, but I would do it on my terms, and it would cost him everything. 6 months passed. During that time, I disappeared from the family radar. I blocked my father's number and skipped Julian's engagement party. I moved into a studio apartment that was basically a closet and lived on coffee and ramen. I sold the Ghost Map to a global tech conglomerate for a staggering sum of $65 million, but I kept the news silent. I didn't buy a Ferrari or a mansion. I used that money to create a private investment firm called November Lake Holdings. I chose the name because it sounded cold and deep, just like the way I felt. While my father and Julian were busy posing for magazine covers, I was busy buying up the debt of their subcontractors. I was a silent shadow moving through their books. I realized that Julian had been cutting corners to make the quarterly earnings look better for the board. He was using shell companies to hide massive losses in their New York developments. It was a classic fraud, the kind of thing a forensic mind like mine could see from a mile away. My father was so blinded by his pride in Julian that he never checked the math. He assumed the strong son was doing a great job. He never suspected that the worthless son was now holding the keys to his kingdom. The trap was set for the annual shareholders meeting in July. This was the biggest day of the year for Whitmore Enterprises. They were planning to announce a massive merger with a European firm that would double their valuation. If the merger went through, my father would become one of the wealthiest men in the country. If it failed, the company would be vulnerable to a hostile takeover. I knew the European investigators were thorough, but they hadn't seen the internal leaks yet. They only saw the polished reports Julian provided. I arrived at the Whitmore building at 9 in the morning. I was wearing my usual cheap sneakers and faded jeans. I wore a charcoal suit that cost $5,000, tailored perfectly to my frame. I walked past the security guards who used to ignore me. They didn't recognize me at first. I looked like a shark. I took the elevator to the top floor where the board of directors was gathered. The atmosphere was celebratory. Champagne was already on ice. My father was at the head of the long mahogany table, looking more powerful than ever. Julian stood beside him, grinning. They were minutes away from signing the deal that would cement their legacy. Then the heavy double doors opened and I walked in. The room went silent. My father squinted at me, his face turning a dark shade of red. "Daniel, what the hell are you doing here?" he barked. He looked around at the directors, embarrassed at his disappointment. The son had crashed the most important meeting of his life. "Security, get him out of here." Julian stepped forward, looking smug. "Come on, Dan. You don't belong in this room. Go back to your spreadsheets at the trucking company. This is for real men." I didn't move. I didn't get angry. I simply pulled a leather-bound folder from my briefcase and slid it down the long table. It stopped right in front of the lead investor from the European firm, a man named Mr. Sterling. "I think you'll find the data on page 12 very interesting, Mr. Sterling," I said, my voice calm and steady. "It details a $30 million discrepancy in the New Jersey port project. Specifically, money being funneled into an offshore account in the Cayman Islands registered to a company called Apex Logistics, a company, I might add, that is secretly owned by Julian Whitmore." The silence that followed was deafening. I saw the blood drain from Julian's face. My father looked at the folder, then at Julian, then back at me. He looked like he was having trouble breathing. The celebration was over before it even began. Mr. Sterling put on his glasses and began to flip through the pages. The room was so quiet, you could hear the ticking of the clock on the wall. Every board member was staring at the documents I had provided. I had included everything: bank transfers, forged signatures, and internal emails that Julian thought he had deleted. My forensic software had found the digital footprints he left behind. "This is a lie," Julian shouted, his voice cracking. "He's just jealous. He's trying to ruin us because Dad called him out at the gala." But Mr. Sterling didn't look up. He looked at the last page, which contained a notarized confession from Julian's own accountant, whom I had tracked down and paid handsomely to tell the truth. "Arthur," Mr. Sterling said, his voice cold as ice, "this merger is dead. In fact, we will be notifying the SEC immediately. This isn't just a discrepancy. This is criminal fraud." My father collapsed into his chair. The man who had spent 40 years building an empire looked like a broken shell. He looked at me, not with anger this time, but with a terrifying kind of realization. He saw that the weed in his garden had just leveled the entire estate. I stood there, watching him, and I felt nothing but a quiet sense of justice. The fallout was instant and brutal. Within an hour, the news of the failed merger hit the wires. Whitmore Enterprises' stock price plummeted like a stone in a well. By noon, the FBI was at the front door with boxes and warrants. Julian was taken out in handcuffs, his expensive suit wrinkled and his pride gone. My father wasn't arrested yet, but he was finished. The board of directors voted to remove him as CEO by 2 in the afternoon. He sat in his office, watching the city he thought he owned, while lawyers and federal agents swarmed his building. I walked into his office one last time. He didn't even look up when I entered. "Why?" he whispered. "You're a Whitmore. Why would you destroy your own name?" I walked over to his desk and leaned down, so I was at eye level with him. "You told everyone I was worthless, Dad." I said, "You told them I couldn't handle a boardroom." I just wanted to show you that I'm actually much better at this than you or Julian ever were. You were so busy looking for a shark that you didn't realize you had a kraken living in your house. I turned to leave, but he called out my name. Daniel, wait. We can fix this. You have the money. You can save the company. I paused at the door and looked back at him. I'm not here to save your company, Dad. I'm here to buy it. His jaw dropped. What? I smiled a small, cold smile. My firm, November Lake Holdings, has been shorting your stock for weeks. We made a fortune today. And now, I own 48% of the outstanding shares. By tomorrow morning, I'll have the majority. I'm moving the headquarters to a smaller building. I'm liquidating the luxury assets. And the first thing I'm going to do as a new owner is take your name off the front of the building. The look of pure shock on his face was the best birthday present I could have ever asked for. I walked out of the building and down to the street. The sun was shining, and the city looked different now. It didn't look like a playground for monsters anymore. It looked like a place where a dreamer could finally breathe. I had spent my whole life trying to earn his respect, but I realized I didn't need it. I had something better. I had my own life, built on my own terms. As I walked away, I thought about the museum of rocks and feathers I used to keep as a kid, things he threw away because they had no value. I realized that value isn't something someone gives you. It's something you prove one pattern at a time. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of legal filings and corporate restructuring. I didn't enjoy the destruction, but I enjoyed the order I was bringing to the chaos. I hired the best forensic team in the country to clean up the mess Julian had made. I found more than just a New Jersey fraud. There were layers of corruption that went back a decade. My father had known about some of it, but he had looked the other way because it was profitable. He had traded his integrity for a larger empire, and in the end, he lost both. I moved my office into the Whitmore building, but I didn't take the top floor. I took a mid-level office with a view of the park, a place where I could see the people walking below. I wanted to stay grounded. Julian's trial was set for the winter, and the evidence was airtight. He tried to call me from jail, begging for a lawyer, but I didn't answer. He had made his choices. He had chosen to be the strong son by stealing from the very people who trusted him. I wasn't going to use my money to bail out a thief, even if he was my brother. Blood might be thicker than water, but it isn't thicker than the truth. One afternoon, my mother called me. She had been living in a separate wing of the estate for years, mostly ignored by my father. She was a quiet woman who had given up her own dreams to support his ambition. Daniel, she said, her voice trembling, your father is in a bad way. He's lost everything. The house is being foreclosed on. I felt a pang of guilt, but it was quickly replaced by the memory of her standing by while he humiliated me at the gala. I know, Mom, I said. I'm the one who bought the debt on the house. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. Are you going to throw us out? She asked. I took a deep breath. No, you can stay in the house for the rest of your life. But Dad has to move into the guest cottage. He doesn't get to live in the master suite anymore. He doesn't get the staff or the drivers. He's going to live a simple life, like the beggars he used to mock. It was a harsh sentence, but it was a fair one. I wasn't a monster. I was just a man who believed in consequences. I set up a trust with my mother, so she would never want for anything. But my father was cut off from the Whitmore fortune entirely. I visited my father at the guest cottage a month later. He was sitting on the small porch, looking at the main house he no longer owned. He looked older, smaller, and his expensive suits had been replaced by simple wool sweaters. He didn't look like a titan of industry anymore. He looked like an old man who had run out of time. You really did it, he said, not looking at me. You took it all. I sat down in the chair next to him. I didn't take it. Dad, you gave it away. You gave it away the moment you decided that people were just tools for your ego. You let Julian rot the company from the inside because you liked the way he flattered you. He finally looked at me, and I saw a flicker of the old fire in his eyes. I built that company with my bare hands. Daniel, you just used a computer program to steal it. I shook my head. No, I used a computer program to see what was real. That's the difference between us. You lived in a world of illusions and ego. I live in a world of data and facts. And the fact is, you failed. I'm just the one who pointed it out. He went quiet then, and we sat in the silence for a long time. I realized then that I had finally achieved what I wanted, but it wasn't the satisfaction of revenge that felt best. It was the fact that I no longer cared what he thought. I wasn't the boy at the gala anymore, burning with shame. I was a man who had built a $65 million platform on his own merit. I had saved thousands of jobs by stabilizing the company and purging the corruption. I was respected by the board and the employees, not because of my last name, but because I was fair and competent. I had turned the ghost map into a global standard for logistic security. I was making more money than my father ever had, but I was doing it without the lies. I stood up to leave, and my father reached out and touched my arm. "Daniel," he whispered. I'm sorry." I looked at his hand, then back at his face. "I know you are, Dad, but you're only sorry because you lost. If the merger had gone through and you were a billionaire, you'd still be laughing at me at the next gala." I pulled my arm away and walked to my car. I didn't look back. The past was a closed book, and I was busy writing a brand new story. The story of the Whitmore downfall became a national headline. It was a perfect narrative. The favored son who was a fraud, the arrogant father who fell from grace, and the worthless son who rose from the shadows to save the day. Magazines that used to ignore me were now begging for interviews. They wanted to know the secret to my success. I told them the same thing every time. Pay attention to things other people think are too small to matter. I stayed away from the gala circuit and the celebrity parties. I spent my time in my office, working on the next version of my software. I wanted to expand into medical logistics, helping hospitals track life-saving supplies. I wanted my work to mean something more than just profit. I realized that my father's mistake wasn't just being mean. It was being narrow-minded. He thought power was about holding things down. I learned that true power is about lifting things up. I hired a new team of young analysts, people who had been overlooked just like I was. I gave them the tools and the respect they deserved. My company became a place where the dreamers were the ones in charge. Julian's trial began in the winter, just as the first snow started to fall. I had to testify as a witness for the prosecution. I sat in the witness stand and looked at my brother across the courtroom. He looked thin and pale, his eyes darting around the room. He tried to make eye contact with me, his expression pleading for mercy. I looked away. I spent 4 hours explaining the technical details of his fraud. I showed the jury exactly how he had moved the money and how he had forged the signatures. It wasn't personal. It was forensic. When I was finished, the prosecutor asked me one final question. "Mr. Whitmore, why did you investigate your own brother?" I looked at the jury and then at Julian. "Because a name doesn't give you the right to steal," I said, "and because the truth is the only thing that actually lasts." The jury didn't need much time. Julian was sentenced to 10 years in federal prison. It was a heavy sentence, but the scale of his theft was massive. As they led him away, my mother wept in the front row. My father wasn't there. He couldn't bring himself to witness the final collapse of his favorite son's reputation. After the trial, I took a month off. I traveled to a small house on the coast of Maine, a place where the air was cold and the ocean was loud. I spent my days walking on the beach, collecting smooth stones and pieces of sea glass, just like I did when I was a child. I realized that for 30 years, I had been carrying the weight of my father's expectations like a heavy stone. Now I finally felt light. I wasn't the disappointment anymore. I was just Daniel. I thought about the names on my father's list, the people he said I should never talk to because they were below our status. I realized those were the people who actually made the world move. The truck drivers, the warehouse workers, the clerks. They were the ones my software was designed to protect. I felt a deep sense of peace knowing that I was using my mind for something good. I watched the sun set over the Atlantic, and I felt a quiet joy. I didn't need a skyscraper with my name on it to feel important. I just needed to know that I had done the right thing. I was ready to go back and build a future that wasn't haunted by the past. When I returned to the city, I made a final decision about Whitmore Enterprises. I decided to rebrand the company entirely. I didn't want the Whitmore name to be associated with fraud and ego anymore. I renamed it Vanguard Logistics. I sold off the fleet of private jets and the executive car service. I invested that money into employee benefits and new technology. The morale in the building soared. People who worked under my father's thumb for decades finally felt like they were being heard. I set up a scholarship fund for the children of our workers, something my father would have called a waste of capital. To me, it was the best investment we could make. I was creating a legacy that wasn't built on bloodlines, but on opportunity. My father heard about the rebranding from my mother. He called me, his voice shaking with rage. "You're erasing me. You're erasing everything I built." I listened to him for a moment, feeling a strange kind of pity. "No, Dad," I said quietly. "I'm just making room for something better. You build a monument to yourself. I'm building a future for everyone else." He hung up, and for the first time, I didn't feel the need to explain myself further. Years passed, and Vanguard Logistics grew into a global powerhouse. We became the gold standard for ethics in the industry. I was invited to speak at universities and business conferences around the world. I always started my speeches with the same story, the story of a boy who was told he was worthless at a gala. I wanted people to know that your starting point doesn't define your finish line. I met a woman named Sarah, a doctor who worked in public health. She didn't care about my bank balance or my corporate title. She liked me because I was quiet and because I noticed the small things. We got married in a small ceremony in Maine, far away from the cameras and the socialites. My mother was there, looking happy and at peace. My father didn't come. He stayed in his cottage, still holding on to the ghost of his empire. Julian was still in prison, but he had started taking classes in accounting. He wrote me a letter once, apologizing for everything. I didn't write back, but I made sure he had books and supplies. I had moved on, and I hoped that one day they would too. I often think about that night at the gala, the way the light hit the crystal glasses, and the way the laughter felt like ice. I realized that my father's cruelty was actually a gift. If he had been kind, if he had given me a corner office and a fancy title, I might have become just like him. I might have become complacent and arrogant, blinded by my own reflection. His rejection forced me into the shadows, and it was in the shadows that I learned how to see. I learned to work harder, think deeper, and value the things that really mattered. I learned that worthless is just a word used by people who are afraid of things they don't understand. I am 35 now, and I have more than I ever dreamed of. But the thing I value most isn't the $65 million or the global company. It's the fact that I can look in the mirror and know that I built my life with honesty. I am no longer the invisible son. I am the man who saw the patterns in the dark and used them to bring the truth into the light. And that, more than any skyscraper, is my true legacy. The final piece of the puzzle came when my father passed away. He died quietly in his sleep at the cottage. He didn't leave a will, mostly because he had nothing left to leave. I went to the cottage to clean out his things. It was a small, simple place, filled with old photos and dusty books. In the back of a desk drawer, I found a small wooden box. I opened it and felt a lump in my throat. Inside were the smooth stones and feathers I collected as a child. He hadn't thrown them away. He had kept them all those years, hidden in the dark. For a moment, I felt a deep sadness for the man he could have been if he hadn't been so consumed by his own ego. He had loved me in his own broken, twisted way, but he didn't know how to say it without it feeling like a weakness. I took the box back to my house and put it on a shelf in my study. It's my own little museum, a reminder of where I came from and the journey I've taken. I realize then that forgiveness isn't about forgetting the past. It's about letting go of the hope that the past could have been different. The Whitmore story is now taught in business schools as a case study in corporate governance and ethics. But to me, it's just my life. It's the story of how I found my voice when the world was trying to keep me quiet. I still work long hours, but I make sure to be home for dinner with Sarah. We have a daughter now, and I make sure she knows every single day that she is valuable, not because of what she achieves, but because of who she is. I don't care if she wants to build skyscrapers or collect rocks on the beach. I just want her to be kind and to pay attention. I've learned that the greatest form of power isn't control. It's observation. When you really see people, you don't need to dominate them. You just need to support them. My company continues to grow, and we are now working on a project to track carbon emissions in shipping. I'm still the dreamer, but now my dreams are helping to save the world. I think about my father sometimes when I'm looking at the city skyline, and I hope he's finally found the peace he couldn't find in life. Julian was released from prison last year. He's a different man now. The arrogance is gone, replaced by a quiet, cautious way of moving through the world. He works for a nonprofit that helps formerly incarcerated people find jobs. He's not rich, and he'll never have a gala held in his honor, but he seems happier than he ever was at Whitmore Enterprises. We get coffee once a month, and we talk about the things we missed when we were growing up. We talk about our mother, and we talk about the mistakes we made. We don't talk about the money or the company. We just talk like brothers. It took a long time to get here, and the path was paved with pain and betrayal, but we made it. I realized that the worst way I proved my father wrong wasn't by destroying him. It was by becoming a better man than he ever thought possible. I didn't just take his money. I took his worldview and I replaced it with something kinder. That was the ultimate victory. I was no longer a weed. I was the gardener, and I was making sure the world was a little bit brighter. I often think about the ghost map, the software that started it all. It was born out of a desire to find the truth in a world full of lies. I realize now that we all have a ghost map inside us, a way of seeing the hidden connections and the secret leaks in our own lives. For a long time, my map was broken by my father's words. I saw myself as small and insignificant. But once I started looking at the data, I realized the map was showing me a different story. It was showing me that I had strength, intelligence, and a capacity for justice that my father could never understand. I learned to trust my own map, even when the rest of the world was telling me I was lost. That's the lesson I want to leave behind. Don't let someone else draw your map for you. You are the only one who knows the territory of your own heart. Pay attention to the quiet voices, the small patterns, and the truths that stay hidden in the shadows, because that's where the real power is. And once you find it, no one can ever take it away from you. Vanguard Logistics is now a leader in global sustainability. We are proving every day that you can be profitable without being predatory. I spend a lot of my time mentoring young entrepreneurs, especially the ones who look like they don't belong in the room. I tell them that being an outsider is an advantage, not a disability. It gives you a perspective that the people on the inside can never have. It allows you to see the flaws in the system and the opportunities for change. I've lived both lives, the invisible son and the powerful CEO, and I can tell you that the former was much more important to my development. It taught me humility, empathy, and the value of hard work. I am proud of what I built, but I am more proud of who I become. I am Daniel, the boy who collected rocks, the man who saw the truth, and the father who loves his daughter. My life is full and my heart is at peace. The worst way I prove him wrong was simply by living well and doing good, and that is the most satisfying revenge of all. I am standing on the balcony of my office now, looking out at the city. The sun is setting, painting the buildings in shades of orange and gold. I can see the park where I used to walk when I was feeling worthless. I can see the hotel where the gala was held all those years ago. It feels like a lifetime ago. I take a deep breath and feel the cool air in my lungs. I am here. I am present. I am paying attention. I think about the millions of people who are working right now, the ones who are driving the trucks and moving the boxes and filing the papers. I am working for them. I am protecting their work and their futures. I am no longer a ghost in a marble house. I am a part of the world, and the world is a part of me. I smile as I think about my daughter waiting for me at home, ready to show me the new treasures she found today. I pick up my coat and turn off the light. I'm going home. And as I walk out the door, I know that my father was wrong about a lot of things, but he was right about one thing. A man's legacy is his bloodline, but it's not about wealth or power. It's about love, and it's about the truth.